Side down.
Whoa!
You are about to...
Being a superhero is a full-time job. It is reputable, it is cool, and overall, it is fun. But in order to be a superhero, do you have to have a dark backstory, or get bitten by a radioactive spider, or blasted with radiation? While we have had fan-favorite superheroes who were made these ways, sometimes superheroes are born and not made. Madame Cassandra Webb is one such superhero. Her powers, which are enough to scare and worry a lot of people, were something she was born with. Does that make her a mutant? What exactly is her power? How does she use it? With a new Madame Web movie coming our way, we will answer every burning curiosity in this video, so stay tuned. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
This is one situation you cannot crawl away from.
Who is Cassandra Webb? Is she a mutant? Cassandra Webb has had a hard life, to be honest. She was born blind with a debilitating autoimmune disorder. These two things definitely affected her life in several ways that we cannot fathom. However, there was one thing that she had going for her, which was her powers. She had great psychic and telepathic abilities, and her power to astral project altogether made her a good medium. But how did she end up with her powers? In the Spider-Man universe, the majority of the heroes ended up with their powers from external sources. However, in the case of Madame Web, that was not the case. She was seemingly born with the powers. This technically makes her a mutant. This had led to quite the uproar in the mutant community, especially for Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut. However, there is something strange about her mutant abilities that completely shocked us. Unlike most mutants who died with their powers, Madame Web did not. She was able to give it away to someone who she thought was worthy to carry on the legacy of Madame Web. What type of disease does she have? While the comic book universe has never had any problems with disabled heroes, how many times do we truly see a real and rare medical condition get highlighted? Well, not much. However, Madame Web is a good example of that representation. Madame Web was born with a chronic autoimmune disorder known as myasthenia gravis. This disorder is caused when the antibodies, the cells that fight with the viruses and bacteria that are attacking us, decide to attack the neuromuscular communication system and hence weaken the skeleton muscles and control over them. It is very common in younger women between their 20s and 30s, and it has no cure. This disease specifically affects the muscles that we can't control in our eyes, face, limbs, and mouth. This leads to difficulty in breathing, swallowing, and moving. This definitely makes Madame Web an extremely vulnerable target. This is the biggest reason why the majority of the time her location is very much hidden. Each time her location got out, she was attacked, and thanks to this disease, running away was not an option for her. The only thing that saved her was a Spidey superhero coming in at the last minute to save her. Despite all of that, thanks to her powers, Madame Web is quite a powerful psychic, and most of the time, she is able to send the help signal before the kidnapper or attacker shows up thanks to her precognitive abilities. Can she live without her wheelchair? Madame Web has a very life-threatening disease, as we described earlier, so in order for her to stay alive, she needs to be on life support. So for that purpose, her husband, Jonathan Webb, designed a wheelchair for her that helps her move and stay alive. The man had a sense of humor, which is why he designed this elaborate chair. He made it seem like there was a spider web around it. However, the fact that she is dependent on this chair is not made obvious when we first meet her. We get to see this whole thing in action when Juggernaut is introduced into the equation. Juggernaut was sent to kidnap Madame Web, but Madame Web already knew about it. She told Spidey about it, and even though Spidey showed up, Juggernaut was successful in the kidnapping. But when he was kidnapping her, he left her chair. This led to Madame Web starting to weaken and die. Seeing that she was dying already, Juggernaut simply dropped the mission and went away. She was immediately hospitalized, and thankfully, she was saved. When she gets immortality in the later arc, we do see her in a wheelchair that is less complicated than the one her husband had designed, as a symbolic representation of her better health. But the old wheelchair comes back into the picture the moment her health deteriorates. Does she have telepathic ability? When it comes to Madame Web, she is an extremely strong telepath. Most of her powers, as we see in the comics, deal with telepathy, psychic abilities, clairvoyance, and precognition. These powers are extremely helpful when you think about it. Since Madame Web is trapped in her wheelchair, having the ability to astral project, that is, the ability to project her consciousness out of her body, allows her to do all the snooping that she wants to do without being caught. Her telepathic abilities help her create telepathic blocks wherever there is a need read and also understand the intentions of anyone she comes across. When she uses her precognition, she gets an idea of the future and what the future holds, which definitely helps her have a better idea of how things should be done in the present to have the best possible future out there. We see her powers in full form when Peter and she have a run-in. At first, Peter is very skeptical about Madame Web and her powers. He is sure that she's simply a charlatan. However, he changed his mind when he met with Madame Web following her advert. Whatever she said helped him with the work he was doing, and he started believing in her powers. However, whatever remnants of doubts he had about Madame Web's powers escaped his mind when Madame Web showed up at his apartment, blatantly stating that she knew he was Spider-Man, something he had definitely not mentioned. Madame Web's powers also came in handy when Spider-Man was trying to stop an assassination from happening. There were 2 assassins and Peter did not know about that. Madame Web called him from a payphone and told him about the 2 assassins on the water tower, which helped Peter thwart their plans and save the day yet another time. Can she control minds? When it comes to her powers, we know that Madame Web does have the power to read minds and intrude into your deepest thoughts. However, whether or not she can control minds has been up for debate for a while. However, in the Spider-Woman story arc, we get to know the true extent of her powers. In this storyline, there is a Spider-Woman running amok in New York City who was created in a lab by Dr. Octavius. This Spider-Woman, better known as Charlotte Witter, is quite the troublemaker. In order to stop her, Madame Web decided to call upon the previous holders of the Spider-Woman title, Jessica Drew and Julia Carpenter, along with Maddie Franklin, who got the power from a ritual she participated in with Madame Web. The Spider-Women together defeated Charlotte Witter, and that is when we learned how she was siphoning Madame Web's telepathy. Because of this siphoning, Madame Web ended up aging instantly. This led to Madame Web realizing that if she wanted to survive, she would have to drain Charlotte's powers herself, which she did, leaving Charlotte in a comatose state. The moment the connection was broken, Madame Web became younger again, and with no power being drained from her, Madame Web was able to intrude into Charlotte's mind and sever the link that they had. This was the demonstration of an ability she has known as mind surgery, which makes her infinitely scarier than she already was. Not only that, Madame Web even went inside the heads of Charlotte and Maddie and deleted the memories they had of Spider-Man's real identity. As she is able to do all of these things, we have reasons to believe that Madame Web can, in fact, control minds. Madame Web's useful transformation. How does she get immortality? At one point, Madame Web decides to partake in a ritual known as the Gathering of 5. In this ritual, there are 5 different pieces of an ancient relic, and 5 people would take 1 piece each, and when the time is right, they would put the pieces together. However, there is a catch because these ancient rituals are never without one. These 5 pieces can give the beholder one of the 5 things, which are knowledge, death, immortality, power, and madness. Now, clearly, nobody wants madness or death, but the probability is there. When the time is right, the incantation is said and the centerpiece is placed first. That causes tendrils of white light to draw out the centerpiece, highlighting which piece should be placed on the stand after that, and the beholder is given the power. Madame Web participated in this Gathering of 5 with Morris Maxwell, Norman Osborn, Maddie Franklin, and Gregory Hurd. Norman Osborn placed the centerpiece in the first piece that needed to be laid after it was the piece that belonged to Madame Web. She placed it and immediately she was thrown away from the stand in a sort of shock. When the rest of the team checked her pulse, there was not any, so everyone assumed that she had death. However, as we have said before, these ancient ritual things are never without a catch. When it comes to the relics, what seems to be the case on the surface is not what it actually is. Immortality is what Madame Web got. However, in the first moment it seemed like she got death because of the ancient relic rules. We'll learn about this when we see Madame Web in the 6th issue of The Amazing Spider-Man 1999, where she rolls up to meet Maddie Franklin looking extremely young. Does Madame Web possess the power of astral projection? Now, as we know, due to her health issues, Madame Web is not always out and about. However, when you meet her, there is always the feeling that this lady knows pretty much everything. Like, sure, she has clairvoyance, but how does she know as much as she does? The answer is simple. She has astral projection as a power. This power allows her to travel, swoop in, and sneak in without being detected unless there is another telepath around. This ability allows her to be the seemingly all-knowing being that she is. Astral projection is one of the most powerful powers to have in the Marvel Universe. We see Doctor Strange use it, and we have seen Charles Xavier from the X-Men use it. And honestly, the way Madame Web uses it truly shows the limits of this power that she has. Can she reproduce? There is no mention of a love life for Madam Web, sadly. In the several comic issues where she was talked about, however, there is one thing that we know. While we do not know whether she has a son or daughter, one thing we know for sure is that she has a granddaughter. Her granddaughter is quite unique and memorable, actually. She was the 4th woman who chose the alias of Spider-Woman, but the first one to turn evil. If you guessed it, Charlotte Witter, then congratulations because you're right. Charlotte was a black market dealer, and while on one of such deals, she came across Doc Otto Octavius. Doc Ock experimented on her and turned her into his human spider hybrid. This led to her wreaking havoc all over the city with her newfound powers. This led to Madam Web making the decision that Charlotte needed to be stopped, and so she decided to take help from all the other Spider-Women, namely Jessica Drew, Julia Carpenter, Maddie Franklin, and Spider-Man himself, to thwart her granddaughter. The battle was grueling, but eventually Madam Web was victorious. The victory helped her come back to her youthful form, and Maddie found herself with a mentor in Madam Web. Witter, on the other hand, ended up in a coma when the battle ended. How does she die? Is it possible to resurrect Madam Web? Kraven the Hunter is a very important villain when it comes to Spider-Man's villain arsenal. That is why it is not surprising that Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter eventually cross paths. However, the paths they crossed were not the way we imagined them to be. Kraven the Hunter was dead, and the Kravinoff family wanted to resurrect him. In order to resurrect him, they killed Kane Parker to bring Kraven back to life. For those of you who do not know, Kane is the first ever Peter Parker clone created by Jackal, the evil geneticist and biochemistry professor who did not like Peter because he was in love with Gwen Stacy, and when she died, he blamed Peter for her death. Anyway, Kane was the clone of Peter Parker, so not a true Parker technically. This technicality, however, was pretty grave because that meant that Kraven could be killed by Spider-Man. This led to him killing Madam Web because of his disappointment at the failed ritual. However, as this is comic book stuff, Madam Web did not stay dead. We see her return back into the picture thanks to Jackal, who we mentioned a few moments ago. He brought her back by cloning her, and Madam Web started working for Jackal in the New U Technologies with him. Now, there was a hacker who was trying to hack into the systems of the company, and Jackal decided to use Madam Web to track the hacker down. However, due to telepathic feedback, she was not able to give an exact location, but whatever she did give was enough for the Prowler to figure out who the hacker was. After that, she was approached by Electro, who was looking for Prowler, who had gone missing. Madam Web was hesitant to tell Electro the whereabouts of Prowler because she knew Electro would kill him. However, she was forced to give out the details when she was electrocuted by Electro. The New U Technologies HQ soon became compromised, and there was not much left to do. Madam Web knew the future that was going to take place, and she did not wish to be a part of it. She stopped taking the pills that stabilized her clone body and the cells, and soon enough, she succumbed to the cellular decay from not taking the pills. Why there is more than one Madam Web. Now, as we know, Madam Web is Madam Web because of her mutation. That means the cause of their superpower is genetic, and it is not heritable because, you know, the Mendelian principles of genetic distribution. So we can kind of assume that if a mutant has a mutant power because of the gene in their body, that mutant power will probably be something they will die with because genetic powers cannot be transferred. However, when it came to Madam Web, her mutant powers showed up in a different way. We see that in the Marvel Universe, there is more than one Madam Web. Why is that? Well, that is because this precognitive mutant has the ability to transform her mutant powers into someone else if she chooses to. We see that happen when Cassandra is kidnapped by the Kravinoff family. She knows that they will not let her get out of the whole thing alive. Because of that reason, she passed on her mutant powers to Julia Carpenter, the second Spider-Woman. Once Julia became the Madam Web, Julia became the weaver of the Spider-Man family, being in the center of everyone, watching and informing everyone about any impending doom that might be headed their way. Marvelous verdict. While Madam Web may not have been a web-slinging superhero, she was quite heroic in her own way. Her powers and her own resilience made it very difficult for her disabilities to hold her back, and even though she was stuck in her wheelchair, to a certain degree everybody was scared of Madam Web because of her powers. She was quite a well-respected character, and she definitely deserved immortality out of the 5 in Gathering of 5. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Terrible liar! Please, don't waste my time.
What?
I am not your enemy.